Our lesson today about how to graph exponential function. To graph exponential function, we need Cartesian coordinates x and y, and the exponential function, how to graph it by using points on the curve. Firstly, explain why y equal b power x is not exponential function. If b equals 1, if b equals 1, y equals 1 to the power x, so equals 1. So this function is constant function. Y equals 1. Y equals 1 means line parallel to x-axis and intersect y-axis at the point 0 and 1. So this function is constant function, not exponential function. How to graph the function 3y equal 3 power x? We make a table x and y equal 3 power x. We take some points because this is a curve, so we need many points to represent the exponential function y equal 3 power x. We start with negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. Three power negative 3 equals 1 over 3 power 3 equals 1 over 27. 1 over 27. Negative 2 equals 1 over 9. Negative 1 equals 1 over 3. 0. 3 power 0 equals 1. 3 power 1 power 1 equals 3. 3 power 2 equals 9. 3 power 3 equals 27. Now we represent these points in the graph. We make x and y axis, and now we represent this point, negative 3 and 1 over 27. 1 over 27 approximately here. Negative 2 and 1 over 9. 1 over 9 approximately here. Negative 1 and third here. 0 and 1, 0 and 1 here. 1 and 3, 1, 3 here. 2 and 9, 2 and 9 here. I can't represent 3 by and 27, but I suggest that this is the curve of the exponential function. If we approach to negative infinity, I get numbers smaller and smaller, closer to negative infinity. We find the curve approaches to 0, approaches to x-axis. So we call x-axis here is horizontal asymptote. Asymptote means if we approaches to infinity or negative infinity, the curve approaches to number at y. So the curve approaches to 0, 0 at y equals 0. If x tends to negative infinity, y tends to 0. So y equals 0, x-axis is the asymptote of the function y equal 3 power x. Here, if we represent the function y equal 3 power x minus 1, we leave it before x plus 1 f of x equal x minus a to any power. A here is shift on x-axis in the opposite direction of a, negative a, so the shift here is positive a to the right. In this case, in the exponential function, the same rule we apply. So y equals 3 power x minus 1 is the same like this curve of the function 3 power x, but he has a shift at positive direction of x-axis or to the right. Now we try to represent this graph in the lattice. So this graph, the graph of the function 3 power x. What about the graph of the function y equals 3 to the power x minus 1? This graph, difference of this graph by the shift to the right hand side, to the right hand by 1 unit. So this graph, if we represent this graph, we find this point is translate here, 1 here, 1 2 3, negative 1 negative 2 negative 3, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 and so on. This point here, 2 with 9, 2 with 9 and change here at this point, 8 9, so this point here, and 3 and so on. Negative 1 and third change by here, 0 and negative third here, negative 1 and 1 over 9, 1 over 9 here, and negative 2 here. So this graph of function make like this. The initial curve we graph here, and all points has shift to right by 1. What about the graph of function y equal 3 power x minus 1? The shift here in y-axis in the same direction of this constant. So this graph is shift of this graph to the y dash x or negative direction of y. So this graph here 0 and 1. In this graph 0 and 0, 0 and 0. X, y equal 3 power x minus 1, negative 3, 1 over 27 minus 1, negative 2, 1 over 9 minus 1, negative 1, 1 over 3 minus 1, 0, 1 minus 1 equals 0, 2, 1, 3 power 1 minus 1 equals 2, if you represent this graph in the xy coordinates, we get the graph like this. The same graph, and we shift it to the negative y direction by 1 unit. So in this graph, the horizontal asymptote not x-axis, but here the asymptote y equals -1 is the horizontal asymptote. So if we return to this graph, the range here, firstly we sure that the domain equals R. The domain equals all values of x in the number line from -infinity to infinity. So the domain here is R. Domain here is R. Exponential function, its domain is R. But here, the range from 0 to infinity equal 0 open and infinity open. Here, the domain equals R. The range, the same range from 0 to infinity. But here, the domain equals R, but the range beginning with -1 and go to the infinity from equals -1 open interval from -1 to infinity. So the range depends on the number here. The number here plus 0, from 0 to plus 0, from 0, the range. But the domain for 3 functions is R. What about the graph of function y equal -3 to the power x? What is negative here make in this graph? In this graph, a or -1 here make a reflection about x-axis. So this graph of function make like this. Remember, the graph of function y equal 3 power x make like this. And this graph is the image of the red graph by reflection about x-axis. Now, what about the graph y equals 1 minus 3 to the power x? It is the same graph of -3 to the power x plus 1. So this graph is the image of this graph by shift 1 up y-axis. This graph, the range equals -infinity to 0. But here the range from -infinity to 1. To draw this graph in the xy coordinates, we find the graph make like this. here the horizontal asymptote equals y equals 0, x-axis. But here the horizontal asymptote is y equals 1. So if we make x or take x to negative, approaches to negative infinity, the graph of function or y approaches to y equals 1. What about the graph of function 3 power negative x? Y equals 3 to the power negative x. Here the coefficient of x is negative. What about the graph? The graph of function y equals 3 power x make like this. The graph of function 3 to the power negative x make like this. So this graph is the opposite graph or reflection about y-axis. So the initial graph like this, 3 power negative x like this. Be care, y equals 0 is the horizontal asymptote to this graph and this graph. The range here and here is 0 to infinity. The same range of the graph of y equals 3 power x. What is the difference? The difference here, this graph and this graph 3 power x and 3 power negative x is the reflect about y-axis. What about the graph y equals 3 power x negative 3 to the power negative x? The graph is the reflect of the 3 power negative x at the x-axis, or reflect about y-axis and x-axis to the graph, the initial graph of 3 power x. Now, what is the graph of negative 3 power x? Here. What is the graph of 3 power negative x? 3 power negative x. The red graph. The red graph, if we get the reflect about y-axis, this graph make like this. Here, the range from negative infinity to 0. And y equals 0 is the horizontal asymptote to this graph. What about the graph y equals 3 to the power 1 minus x? Or equal 3 to the power negative x plus minus 1. This graph is make a shift to right hand side to positive direction of x-axis by 1 unit and reflect about y-axis because of negative here. So this graph is like this. the range here from 0 to infinity. And y equals 0 is the horizontal asymptote.